Hello, everyone. Thank you for tuning into this episode of the Software Plaza podcast. I'm Twain Taylor, editor at Software Plaza, and I have the pleasure of speaking to creators, builders, founders across the industry in cloud native computing and DevOps, in Kubernetes, an exciting space. And today is no different. I've got with me Jim Bugwadia, who is the founder and CEO of Nirmata. I don't know if I'm pronouncing this right. Is it Nirmata or Nirmata, Jim? Help me out.
Nirmata.
Nirmata. Okay. All right. All right. Yeah, Jim, we had you actually a couple of years ago. So it's been a while. And I'm sure a lot has changed, especially with AI. So much has changed. So I thought it'd be great to just have you back to get your thoughts on things that are happening right now and what you guys are up to. And actually saw your LinkedIn post where you announced a new AI assistant feature, a new product or a feature that's been launched in Nirmata. And I wanted to get you on the show to give us a little demo of that, especially. Yeah, with that said, I wanted to first get your reaction on the year that was in AI. What would you say?
Yeah, no, first of all, thank you, Dwayne. Pleasure to be back on this show. And, thanks everyone for listening. Yeah, so obviously, lots of things happening in AI. Every day it seems like there's some new headline, new announcement, or new things. And personally, for me, like, being an engineer, I'm usually skeptical of new things. Like there's a lot of marketing hype and some fads come and go. But I went
Mhm.
from being a skeptic for AI to like now being a hardcore believer. I feel it is
Yeah, yeah.
definitely going to change pretty much everything, right? It's kind of like
Wow.
if you think about the early days of the internet, for those of us like myself who are old enough to remember when we first saw like a web browser and then the internet and where we are today. I mean, I'm just so excited to see what the next 5, 10, 20 years hold for us.
Yeah, yeah. And I kind of want to take some of those detours in our conversation, which I'm doing these days with a lot of our guests, to just talk about what they think of AI, because everyone's trying to make sense of it. And it's
Yeah.
interesting that you say you've gone from being a skeptic to a believer and enthusiast. And I think all of us are on that journey at some degree. I was wondering when did that happen? How did it happen? What was this? What made the switch for you? Could you kind of share your perspective on that?
Sure. Yeah, so of course, when Gen AI first launched, like, almost like 2, 3 years ago, the first few interactions were it was like, oh, this is cute. Like, it can generate a poem or it can tell me a story or that's nice.
Yeah.
But now, more and more, like pretty much like, and I'm obvious a software developer by background, still very active and hands-on in coding and other things. To
Mm,
me, like what converted me to being a full believer is how much it has just impacted my mindset as a developer and what it means to be a developer these days. How I use AI, like that's become my go-to tool for
mm.
everything, right? I can't. And somebody was saying, like the new internet is down, is we're out of tokens, and in
Oh
every
yeah, yeah.
price we're
It's
starting
like
to
the
see
new
that.
DSL or something.
So yeah, we ran out of tokens. So it's like, what do we do now? How do we work, right? And it feels very different in just a few months.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. And Yeah, back in the day when there was the internet that was new, and even before that, maybe even computers were new, and you've been through some of that evolution, definitely the internet, as you mentioned. Is it the same or is it different? What's the same? What's different? Because some people say AI is just another tool, and people who say
Mhm.
AI is going to take jobs away.
Yeah.
They haven't been through the previous era, the internet, the dot-com bubble, where everyone said the same things about the internet, but none of that came true. In fact,
Yeah.
it just created a lot more new jobs, and it was great for us as humans. So, But some people say that it's different this time. AI is just so much better and so much more capable, and so things are different this time. Where do you stand on that?
I think the truth is always somewhere in between, right? There's always, like both kind of endpoints, both type of views. I do feel there will be some disruptions. There will be, loss of jobs, or maybe a better way to say it, jobs as we know it will be transformed, right? Because
Mm.
think about it this way, like, when if you, like I tell my kids that, look, at one point people used to write code by punching holes in a paper. And they're like, what are you talking about? That why would anybody do that? But that's what, if you, I've never used a punch card, but I've seen them in like like we have a computer history museum out here in the Bay Area, things like that. But that was the reality, like maybe, not too long ago, like about 50 to 60 years ago. So
Yeah.
now where we are, we can just, tell the system what we want and it generates code better and faster than us. So it's the next evolution. I feel there's a very interesting shift, and I have there's a and as I was talking to it with some of my co-founders and colleagues and teammates, I think it's a return to domain expertise. And,
Okay.
I remember like back in the 90s when I started my first job as a software engineer. um, this was at Motorola, which is a wireless RF telecommunications company.
Mm.
So at that time, like for 3 months before I could write any code, I was required to take RF training. And at that time, I didn't understand. I was like, why do I have to learn RF? I know C++. I'm a software engineer. But what my manager and others explained to me is like, look, to know our system, you have to know the technology. But somewhere along the line, we lost that, right? We said, look, I'm a developer, so I can, somebody else will learn the domain and give me requirements, and I'm going to take a Jira ticket and transfer it into code. Well, now AI can take the Jira ticket and transfer it into code. So really, it's back to being a domain expert. And to me, that's what true engineering is about. You have to love the domain, you have to love the problems you're solving and deeply, deeply understand that to be able to build good products, build good solutions, and bring them to your users.
Wow. Yeah, that's really interesting. Return to domain expertise. And if I could kind of ask you to like tease that out a bit more for us, someone who's listening to this and is wondering, so what do I actually practically do? What does this mean? Do you mean actually get back to like figuring out the nuts and bolts of how computers work from scratch and, build from scratch again, go back to the drawing board in some way? Or is it something else now? Like practically, what would that mean for someone who's listening to this and thinking, what should I do?
Yeah, so I think it means, look, our life is not, obviously, there's so many things we take for granted and we reuse every day. It's about applying software and technology to a particular domain, whether it's finance, healthcare, in our case, IT and operations. So for me, like, for example, Kubernetes is the current, like area of CNCF technologies, cloud native technologies, is the current domain that I focus on. Like I said, when I started my career, it was about telecommunications. And to me, it was almost, I was enchanted and it was magical to think about, okay, how does our voice fly through the air and to reach like, how does this happen? So like
Mm.
how, from my phone, how do I get, signal out of a wireless tower? And there's software that makes it all work, right? And we just take it for granted every day as we're using these technologies. So what I mean by
Mm.
being a domain expert is really applying, if you understand the requirements your users have, whether it's transportation, if you're kind of building, let's say, a next generation vehicle or car, whether it's rockets, if you're, kind of trying to get humanity to Mars or beyond, or if it's just like for example DevOps and platform engineering and things that we do in the Kubernetes and container space. So you have to then really understand the pain points of your users, why they need the software, how they work. And if you understand that, then you can create the best applications for it. Because that part of, know if you know the workflow you want, generating the code is no longer the problem. But the one interesting thing is, like somebody posted, on X, formerly Twitter, that the thing that people are not, we think that everybody's now crushing it with AI and just generating apps. And clearly in the Silicon Valley hype, you see like everybody's now a 100X programmer. But what this person said is, we're forgetting that most people have really bad ideas. So now you're going to
Mm,
100x your bad ideas also, right? So how do you know if it's a good idea or a bad idea? And that's
mm.
where you still need humans. No AI is going to be able to do that for us, right?
Yeah, I'd argue people think AI could do that. If you prompt your ideas into AI and then tell it run a simulation or something, it'll tell you which are the good ones and which are the bad ones. But yeah, I think yeah, there are some ideas that need that real world testing that AI just can't do. Um, yeah, you mentioned working at Motorola and just coming from a telecom background. And I think
Mhm.
that kind of played into you creating Kyverno as well. Talk to us a bit about some of the similarities and some of the lessons that you'd learned back then that you were able to apply to Kyverno that really made it a successful open source project.
Absolutely. Yeah. So, at Motorola and also all through my career after, my fascination was, with how software again impacts our day-to-day lives, whether it's at work, play, and these other invisible, boring technologies we just take for granted, right? But we depend on them so much. So even, like I spent after Motorola, I spent a few years at Bell Labs Lucent, another telecommunications giant, where again, like they, in their orientations, they would instill in us that look, what we're building, lives matter. If there's bugs in the software, it's not just about FCC fines. People depend on this, right? So we had that pride as well as that type of mindset as we were approaching our development. If you fast forward to where we are today, you could say every business is a software business. Doesn't matter if you're, again, like, building cars or selling shoes, or we're all doing somehow we're dependent on software, right? So
Yeah.
from that perspective, software has become mission critical to everyone. So a lot of what we learned, from those regulated, very critical kind of software components was what does it take to, build always on, self-driving, lights out type of systems, right? I mean, you expect, again, like phone systems and things to just work. You expect the internet to just work. And we take, more and more, we take these things again for granted. So how do you instill those type of practices? And one of the things, we learned there was policy-based management, not just
Mhm.
for guardrails, but also for automation is very important, right? And that was the thinking behind even, a little bit of backstory on Kyverno. A lot of companies first build out an open source project and then they kind of build a commercial strategy around it. Kyverno came out of one of our commercial products, right? So at that time, we were consulting with a lot of, different large companies. We had built some Kubernetes management solutions. And one of the services we built, a cloud service, was around policy and governance. And every customer who used it loved it because nothing else did what we could do through that centralized unified governance. And then as Kubernetes matured and we had admission controllers and CRDs and those type of features come into Kubernetes, we, open source Kyverno and made it part of the CNCF community because we felt policies should be easy to use. And also another big difference, like I mentioned, our view has always been policy is not just about blocking things or enforcing rules. It's also about, large scale automation. You need, much like Kubernetes as controllers, policies become lightweight controllers in their own sense.
Yeah, yeah, some really interesting thoughts there. I want to ask about, your you spoke about like how we take for granted that these things should actually work, like the internet and all of that. And I think even with Kubernetes, we're like taking steps to simplify how it's managed, how it's scaled the day to day. And in that sense, like policies, how do you see policies? Do you see policies as helping with simplifying and abstracting the underlying layers of infrastructure so that you can focus on the more meaningful, the top layers? Or do you see it as something that helps you get into the weeds more and not just take for granted that things are working and, but really get in there and get more control or something in between? How do you see policies when it comes to this idea of abstraction?
Yeah. So policies are a little bit meta in nature, right? So they're a form of configuration, and
Hmm.
they're meta configuration in the sense that they're configuration which manages the behavior of other configurations or other runtime rules, right? And even if you think about in an organization, in a company, or in like a, like an open source organization, you have certain governance and certain policies. And really that's like the group deciding, okay, this is the set of rules we're going to use in how we behave with each other, in how we kind of, do our work, or whatever the group's function is, right? So similarly, now think about in the digital world, a policy is a digital rule which the group is saying this is how we want to behave, right? If I'm a, operator or a developer or security team, and any system that has multiple roles, you immediately need some kind of governance or some kind of policies, because as humans, we kind of want to know, how should I behave? Tell me, like the first thing you do when you, join a new company is you read the employee handbook. It's a set of policies. Now, with the first thing when you deploy your app in a cluster, you kind of want that same type of orientation where you're saying, okay, tell me how this app should behave. And I don't necessarily have to go to talk to five people or learn new things. It should all be self-service and easy. So to me, policy is really a productivity tool, because without that, first of all, there's chaos, right? And we can't have that. And now, of course, with AI, developers are producing more code faster than ever before. Systems are getting more and more, automation is driving things in your CI/CD pipeline. Things are coming to your cluster, which you have no idea, like, is this something we should allow or we should not? Is my cluster ready for these type of things? So without these type of, policies and checks, how do you scale? How do you function?
Yeah, yeah. Wow. I wanted to talk about YAML. I saw in one of your posts you mentioned policy as code is no longer just about writing YAML, and probably that's a huge sigh of relief for many who struggle with just a lot of YAML to wrestle with. Can you unpack what you mean by that?
Yeah.
And it'll be interesting to see, especially how you see policy as code changing and evolving and what it means for YAML, because you've been doing this. I think Kimono is out now 7, 8 years now. I don't know. It's been a
Yeah,
while, right?
total, right? Yeah. Yeah, so look, I mean, again, writing YAML, like writing whether it's C++ or Java or Python or Go, you have to know the intent, right? And if you can declare the intent, now more and more systems can do this on your behalf. So I believe very quickly, and it's happening as we speak, and even with our AI assistant and other tools, it's about humans, declaring the intent, and then
Mhm.
machines and agents and other things doing it on their behalf. So, and you could kind of, again, policy is a tool. It achieves either automation or a governance or compliance, but you have to know, why do you need it? What is it, the benefit? And again, as if you can articulate that intent, then it becomes much easier to, for a system or an agent to write that type of policy for you. So I think more and more, much like with coding, a lot of code gets generated through AI already. More and more policies are going that same route.
Okay, okay. Interesting. Yeah, it kind of reminds me even of when you think of like agentic AI and the way people are trying to automate processes. I think you hear them saying it's not about the agent or the tool you use, but figure out your process, your workflow first. Be really clear about that, and only then get to the tool because the tool is the easy part. But
Right.
understanding your workflow is the hard part. Kind of sounds similar.
Yes.
And yeah, practically, what does that mean though? When you say, be clear about what your policy should be like, how can someone who wants to take steps in that direction start?
Yeah, I mean, I think again, going back to that domain expertise. So let's say if you're working in a financial company, right? So clearly there's organizational standards, there's regulatory domains, and there's standards for compliance. So some policies are driven through that. The other, let's say again, you depending on how you're deploying your applications, policies for optimization might also be very important, right? So it's knowing the behaviors of your users, the need requirements from them, and then of course mapping that out to other stakeholders. So that's where you would start, right? And once you capture that, then you can create the set of policies, customize that as you want. Of course, the benefit of the as code part is you can also generate tests. You can run those tests, and then you are kind of deploying and doing something in your staging and production and other systems and environments. But it really comes back to like understanding the needs of your users, and whether you're using policies for security or for automation or for optimization, and then mapping out the ones that you really want.
Right. All right. I'd like to come back a bit to what you mentioned about policies really being about productivity. And I saw something kind of on the same lines in something you wrote recently when you spoke about that it's about universal guardrails, not gates. And
Right.
I'm probably thinking this ties into what you mentioned, where you're saying policies are not about saying no to everything. But yeah, so tell us about your take on this because it sounds quite easy to remember and interesting and something that I'd want to know more about. What does it mean, guardrails, not gates?
Right. And that's something, that's sometimes you're in the platform engineering community and circles when people are building internal developer platform, they talk about guardrails, not gates. So
Mhm.
the way to think about it is, look, as humans, all of us want to do the right thing, right? We all wake up and say, okay, this is, I'm gonna do my best at whatever we're trying to achieve. Nobody has like, at least I believe, no one wakes up with some malicious intent or intention. And most of the times, if you know what is required, you're gonna do, and if you understand the why, you're gonna do the right thing, right? People make the right choices. So how do
Mhm.
you influence, like, let's say in our world of DevSecOps, you have developers, you have operators, you have security. So if you're building a
Mhm.
platform, you want to influence the right behaviors in your developers, but you don't want to block their productivity or make it too difficult. Because if they have to jump through hoops, what's going to happen? Immediately, they're going to bypass your policies and your other things and say, I'll just create my own AWS account, or I'll just kind of find, because my everybody feels their project is so critical they can't wait, right? So I think this
Mhm.
is where it's very important when we talk about guardrails and not gates, is meeting the developers where they are. If I'm running a runtime security tool, and my policy violations are only seen by my security team, and somebody creates a ticket, good luck, right? That's never going to get looked at or fixed. But if while I'm compiling my code and I'm going through my CI checks, I get all my violations. It explains to me why, how that's going to impact my application. Of course, I want to fix that, right? You are meeting me in my, on my turf and explaining to me why this is better for my application. So that's kind of what you can do with good policy as code, which is a game changer. Because now, for years, all these security companies have been running around talking about shifting left, but just by blocking developers early doesn't achieve anything, right? You want to, again, make this something that's digestible, understandable, that they can look at and say, okay, I get it. I know, I see what you mean. I see why it's important, and I'm going to do the
Mhm.
right thing, right? So if it's going to improve my application, why would I not do it? So that's kind of, you want to flip that around from it being an afterthought to being, yeah, I'm going to start with these best practices in mind because, I understand through the guardrails what's required. It's kind of guided me to that correct decision.
Yeah, and and I'm sure that that makes things a lot more predictable having guardrails, and but and also want to ask about drift, especially about how do you detect and handle it, because
Yeah.
like you said, everyone wants to do the right thing, and everyone pushes good code into production, and but it doesn't stay the same. One small change made somewhere affects something else, and there's multiple issues that need to be dealt with. So drift happens; it's a reality. How does Nirmata and Kaverno handle drift? What's the approach?
Yeah. So in our world, the only constant is change, right? So things are policies change, what best practices change, new guidelines come out, applications. So I think it's a continuous process, right? So you're not like done with policies once. So that's why you really have to think of it as code. And just like you update your applications, you update your policy sets as you deploy new technologies, et cetera, that evolves too. But specifically for drift, like one of the things, most popular form of Kyverno policies is cleanup policies, right? Because we all are in a rush to do things, but none of us like to clean up things after ourselves, right? And why not use automation for that? So this is kind of one of the examples where policy-based automation it becomes really, interesting and useful because it will kind of, say, hey, this image hasn't been updated for 6 months. Should we shut down this, namespace, or can I decommission? Or you can automate these kind of things, right? A lot of our, customers, what they'll do is they'll check for dangling references, they'll check for leftover CRDs. And in a large environment, this stuff matters because your cluster gets slower and slower and slower until it dies a slow death, right? So if you're not cleaning up, you're not kind of practicing that hygiene, it's not helping. That's like one form, not exactly drift detection, but in that realm where you're saying, hey, so things are changing, and how do I do? Now, of course, like if you want to do end-to-end drift detection, you will have to compare like the source to the current and make sure you're kind of always reconciling, just like again in Kubernetes, everything is, a control loop and it reconciles your current state to your desired state. That's what now more and more, even with whether it's with agents or with other software automation, it is possible to do and start aligning systems across those.
Mm. All right, all right. I think mentioning automation kind of segues nicely into just getting to what I really wanted to hear about, which is your AI platform that you just launched this past month.
Mhm.
Tell us a bit about it, what it means, what it does, and then after that we could maybe go into a little demo.
Yeah, of course. Yeah, so one of the things, this is a little bit of what we launched, but internally, over the last like 12 to 15 months or so, we've rebuilt our system completely ground up towards, AI and more for agentic workflows, right? And it took me a while to also understand what does that mean. And we see a lot of headlines about SaaS and that's no longer kind of that whether SaaS is dead or SaaS is evolving into vertical SaaS, or what is the future of enterprise software, right? One thing that's clear is I don't feel users are going to just keep producing their own software because it's not just about creating software, it's also about testing software, managing software, deploying it, operating it, etc. Right? But what is also very clear as vendors, like and as somebody, of course, a vendor company selling into the community and the space, software has to move away, and internally what we called it is outcomes, not dashboard. So nobody wants another dashboard, right? Because I
Mm.
observability is fantastic, but I really want outcomes, right? And how do I go from, just presenting as a vendor, we could give you 20 dashboards, but we're leaving it up to you to figure out what to do with them. But what if we could give you the desired outcome? So this again goes back to understanding your users and your domain. So really what we did is we took most of the key use cases, like policy, of course, is one of it. Writing policy as code is another. But we also took like higher level use cases like remediation. And we converted all of these to agents. And internally, we, instead of calling ourselves SaaS, we call ourselves ODAS, which is outcome driven agentic software, right? And to us that resonates quite a bit because every time we think of a new feature, what we ask ourselves is, what's the outcome? Why do we need that? We're not just not going to add that, but let's get to the end goal for the user and think about what outcomes can we deliver as quickly as possible. So I think from that perspective, we built, one of the things we realized is everybody talks about AI and agents, but not all agents are the same. Running an agent on my laptop or desktop with my identity is very different than running an agent in a production cluster, especially if I'm a large financial or a utility or a healthcare. And we work with a lot of, some of the world's largest Kubernetes deployments who are, in very mission critical or domain critical type of environments, right? So at that point, if you am running an agent, in those environments, I can't just give it a high level command and let AI choose my tools and AI choose my skills. It has to be a lot more deterministic. It has to be verifiable. It has to have humans in the loop. So we've actually built, what we call service agents, and these service agents are part of our system, and they run within Nirmata as well as on our customers' clusters, like for remediation, for policy recommendation, for cost optimization, for several other use cases. And we continue to build new agents. But then we also felt that, look, for me as a user, I really need an assistant who knows what I'm doing. We tried to go to Cursor and Claude and say, generate a Kyverno policy, and I got back some Rego. True story, right? It was like, I'm like, hey, this is not even Kyverno. What are you doing? Now they're getting like better because like over time, of course, it continues to improve. But still, if you
Hmm.
have version 1.13 of Kyverno to 1.17 of Kyverno, it won't know the difference, right? And you have to then train it for everything. And by the time you do that, you might as well,
Hmm.
have written the
Yeah,
policy yourself, right? So
yeah,
what we
yeah.
started thinking is, okay, how do we make it super easy? And even in our community, as Kyverno evolves, one of the big questions we keep getting is, oh, like this policy is not working, help me troubleshoot it. Or this policy is a old version, I want to convert it to the new one. Like our thinking is, how do we help people just automate this and make it self-service? So that's why we launched the platform assistant, which is focused on policy as code, but also other use cases around policy as code, and even compliance and a few other things that it can help do. So it's a pretty interesting set of learnings. First of all, understanding that not every agent's the same. You kind of want slightly different behaviors about how much tolerance do you have for, like, non-determinism. Of course, if I'm running on my laptop, I want to be creative. I want to build things. I want to try things. But when I put something in production, I want it to work exactly that same way every time. I don't want different
Yeah.
outcomes two different times, right? So,
Mm,
but I still want to use AI where I can use AI, but in a very controlled manner.
mm. So what was the approach you took to building AI? I'm guessing you probably didn't use something like Claude Code or Claude, the Claude API underneath earlier. What was the approach? How did you design this?
Yeah, it's a interesting, kind of set of things, right? First of all, and you see some of this evolution even in the AI space in general, right? So it's interesting that MCP about 6 to 8 months ago was the hottest thing, right? Everybody was talking MCP is going to take over the world. People were writing converters from REST APIs to MCP, and you're like, "Oh, okay, that doesn't make any sense because you don't want your AI to be calling like granular, kind of APIs, and nobody was thinking about what would be the token cost. How do you make this deterministic, etc. Right? So then people said, okay, well, we can have, there was this thing about code mode, which is like maybe AI can generate, instead of calling a tool through MCP, AI can actually generate code to invoke that tool locally. So you bypass the LLM, right? And you just make a local tool call by generating Python or some compiled language, right? And that was more efficient. But then Anthropic came up with skills, and now skills are much more popular than MCP, right? So these are a lot of these learnings. If you just put something in production and say, "Hey, troubleshoot my pod and debug that for me," that's not going to be very efficient because first of all, each time the AI might do something slightly different. Secondly, you're going to burn a lot of tokens. And imagine having to
Mhm.
do like some of our customers have tens of thousands of clusters, right? How do you collect data across those? I mean, clearly you can't let Claude,
Yeah.
do anything there, right? So those are very hard problems to solve, and that's kind of what we, were really focused on. So the way
Mhm.
the pattern that we saw is most of these Kubernetes agents, they first collect data, and that data collection doesn't have to be it's a workflow, and we've written workflows before AI, right? So use efficient workflows, don't reinvent the wheel. But then there's an analysis part, and for the analysis, you should use AI because it's hard to do. Like you don't know if it's an unstructured or non-deterministic data set. How do you analyze that? It's very hard to write, software logic and rules for all of that, right? So their AI is good, but then once you have the analysis, it's about reporting and publishing. And again, in that type of environment, you don't need AI for that, right? So you kind of have to know when to use AI and when not to. And 80% of enterprise software is really workflows. So as long as you make it that flexible, we think there's better ways of building these production agents than some of what you see today. So that's kind of how we've developed a lot of internal frameworks, internal tools, and best practices on how to build production-ready Kubernetes agents.
Mhm. Kind of reminds me of what you mentioned earlier, which is when you said policies are all about metadata, about config. And in that sense, AI loves metadata. In fact, it's always trying to, take data and abstract it to something meta. In that
Mhm.
sense, it's kind of a very natural fit, right, to think of AI and policies.
Absolutely. Yeah. So, and policy decisions are also very important. There's a lot of other discussion around like decision graphs and context graphs and things like that. Those decisions which we see, from, are the engines running in Kubernetes as admission controllers or policy in the pipelines or policy at the application layer, collecting all those decisions, inputting them, and then being able to analyze them also becomes super important, right? And that is another aspect of how to kind of drive better behaviors in AI, right? So, yeah, I think you're absolutely right. Like policies lend themselves quite well, and again, using AI both throughout that SDLC type of life cycle for policy, as well as once you're in production, constantly tuning and checking and evolving things.
All right, all right. I wonder if we can see it in action right now.
Yeah, absolutely. Let me share my screen and I'm gonna go straight to the command line for the assistant. I'll
Awesome.
explain like the context a little bit of what we are doing here. So I'll
All
just
right.
run, so NCTL is our command line. NCTL AI is how you launch our assistant. So here it's just coming up and kind of telling you a little bit of what it can do. This assistant
Mhm.
also has, you can train it, give it more skills. So skills are just markdown files with you can package, other scripts and other utilities in it for common practices, right? So if there's something you want to train it to or extend the AI, you can do it through that. You can also, of course, use MCP for adding more tools like your enterprise tools for Jira or Git or other things. Or you can also use it, like as an MCP server in Cloud Code or other things, right? So let's say, I want to kind of start with something very simple. Let's say I want a policy, to say generate a policy that requires, let's call it a team label, and we'll ask it to add tests. And so what the assistant will do is, of course, it'll say, okay, let me look at my generating policy skills. You can customize this if you have certain best practices, etc. And it's going to pick, based on the version of Kyverno you're running, it's going to know. So in this case, I'm running the latest. So it said, okay, I'm going to go to a cell-based validating policy, right? And, in a few seconds, like I have a basic policy, it's going to store that for me. But the cool thing is it will also say, okay, let me help you with some of the tests. Let me do that, and generate that and create all the your entire like policy as code for you, right? So in Kyverno, we have multiple ways you can test things. We have Kyverno tests, which can do all your basic kind of checks. We also
Mm.
have, if you want to do in-cluster tests, we have Chainsaw. And tests, of course, you'll require mock resources. So in this very simple case, like which is, okay, I want to have certain labels, but how do I make sure that it passes on different kinds of pods? How do I make sure that, if there's other special characters, things like that. So it's thinking on my behalf. It's kind of generating these. It will kind of go through all of the tests and tell me what I did, right? So now again, in a few, like this could be any more complex policies and other things too, but this is a very basic flow. Now let's take a more interesting case, right? So if I say, how do I make my cluster? Let me move my Zoom bar out. Um, Yeah, everybody wants to be SOC 2 compliant, right? So let's say I want to be SOC 2 compliant. I don't, know what that would mean for my Kubernetes cluster, but let's say if I ask it to do that, what it's going to do is it's going to start now loading the compliance skill. And again, these are very pluggable. It's trying to look at different mappings that it found to say, okay, if I want to do a SOC 2 standard, what can I do and how do I kind of, do that? And in this case, it picked two or three policy sets, and some of this stuff is flying by a little bit quickly, but the idea is like it's going to do this. Like if I had to spend as a team, I want to make my environment SOC 2 compliant or PCI DSS compliant or HIPAA compliant, and not only do it once, but keep up with this, I would be spending significant time and effort trying to study these standards and do that, right? With our AI, like it figured out, okay, what makes sense for Kubernetes, what doesn't. It gave me an assessment of my cluster. It's telling me where it failed, where it passed. Now I could say, it's saying, do you want to install the missing policy sets? Do you want to, kind of, look at, more details, or what would you like to do, right? So I could say, let's see if I say email me a report, and I'll just give it my Nirmata email. And if I do that, it should, kind of now again through an email tool, which obviously we have because I'm connected to my Nirmata system, it's able to go ahead and, send me that report, which would basically, and actually if you have your custom brand skills and stuff, it will also load that, which is kind of cool. So yeah, so that's some basic workflows, but just in a few minutes. I don't have to be, an expert in compliance, but if I'm running my clusters and if I'm running other, kind of utilities or different applications, anybody can download this CLI, and, you can kind of try it out with your cluster and tell it to do a basic scan, tell it to kind of generate some policies, and it will tell you, again, give you this. You can then output it in different formats and see what, so it told me, hey, this is the summary of what it sent. Let me check my email real quick and see if I got that. But yeah, that's kind of how easy, it is. And this is what I mean. So this is my summary that it gave me. It sent me, a nice report I can share with the team, and that's it, right? So this is where and the future of people sort of understanding, as we're saying, the domain, some of this, and being able to kind of declare the intent, see what you want. And now if I want to generate policies, test policies, save them in my Git, the assistant kind of helps you just, with productivity, something that could have taken me weeks or days, it will do it. Now, this is just the starting point, right? So once I know the violations, the other agents, the service agents I was talking about, like the remediation agent, will be able to actually map, the violations to your applications, create pull requests in your clusters. The other, recommender agent will see what other policies you require. The optimizer agent that we have in Nirmata will kind of look at other things. So that's how the whole system works together to deliver, like I said, outcomes, right? And not just give you one more dashboard, because who needs that, right? We all want to kind of spend our time doing better things. So this is a way to optimize your day.
Yeah, yeah. Yeah, fascinating stuff. It's kind of like Claude Cowork and just how proactive it is and how it figures out steps and it's automatically doing a bunch of stuff that you didn't tell it, give it exact directions. You're kind of telling it the outcome, like you said, and it's figuring out the steps to get to that outcome. Really, really cool stuff. One thing that I'm thinking of, which we also you touched on, is just about how to avoid errors, hallucinations, which is very expected with AI. Like, how have you taken steps to make sure this reduces or completely avoids those kind of errors, especially with things like getting version numbers wrong or giving recommendations that are for a different version, the details like that. Uh, how have you ensured that?
Yeah, it's a lot of trial and error and a lot of training and tuning, right? So, like our engineers have spent hours and days, like with every little, of these type of variations. And as we find them, it's kind of we have to, of course, add that to the world, the model's kind of view of the world to say, okay, yeah, this is some information, and over time, that knowledge base grows and grows. Of course, because we've been working, for several years with Kyverno and Kubernetes and the related domains, we have the benefit of kind of applying all of that to begin with. But yeah, it takes several. So again, you could start lower in the stack, like if you just use vanilla Claude Code or Cursor or any one of those. Sure. I mean, you can spend those hours and days and months yourself, but if you want the expertise that like others who have been working in the field and all that collective knowledge to be of value, then you get to a lot more error-free. So just quick benchmarks. We will be open sourcing these at some point. We're kind of working towards that. But we see typically for these kind of complex platform engineering tasks, Claude Code and Cursor and others, I mean, they do, 40 to 60% accuracy, and then you have to do a lot more work. That last 20% is super, super hard, right? So, getting to maybe 60, 70% is okay, but if you want like 98% accuracy, it's very, very hard. And then
Yeah.
managing the context and making it efficient is also harder, right? So that's where we aim for like about 98 to 100% accuracy on first shot, like no retries, nothing, first shot, right? That's the benchmark that we measure to, and it's then again tuning and keep feeding it more and more information and knowledge, but only for what we care about. Right now, Cursor and Claude and others, they are trying to take the whole internet and everything in. We just
Mm.
care about, platform engineering domain and focus on what you need to know for that.
Yeah, yeah. I think really voicing the pains of everyone who tries to build with
Right.
AI. Because, like last week as well, I spoke to one of the co-founders who mentioned we rebuilt our website with AI and we could get it 80% done in 20 minutes, which was awesome. But then we spent the next 2, 3 weeks getting it up to the next 100% ready. So, yeah, very true that. Um, and yeah, yeah. I also want to I found interesting that you see this as a way of making this kind of technology accessible to not just enterprises but even the startups, and that even shows in the pricing.
Mhm.
Talk to us about that.
Yeah, so one exercise we went through internally, and something I always felt, like I mentioned, we work with very large enterprises, right? So a lot of large financials, a lot of utilities, healthcare, like several, like even retail type of customers, but very mostly like large enterprise, right? And they run like some of the customers we have. I think one of them runs like something like 8,000 nodes in a single cluster. It's all on-prem. It's and others are running thousands or tens of thousands of clusters. So one of the things we always felt is, look, we have Kyverno, which is loved by so many people, and it's free and it's open source. And then we have this very large enterprise type of offerings, which are fairly expensive, right? So when somebody was asking us, how come we don't have anything in the middle, right? And shouldn't we be targeting other people who might also? And I was like, yeah, that's a great point, right? We should build software which everybody can use, and not just go from like open source to large enterprise, which could be like multiple millions of dollars and more. But we want to kind of meet everybody where they are and in their journey, because like again today with these tools and things, everybody should be an expert, and the more people have critical systems, etc. So that's where we have a very low price point. It's on our public a little website. If you go to our pricing page on nirmata.com, the platform assistant, you can get started for $20 a month. And then of course you can scale into our enterprise systems when you're ready. So even if you're just converting policies, troubleshooting Kyverno, there's a lot more it can do. I just covered like maybe the tip of the iceberg of 5% of what it can do. But other things which you would spend a lot of time on, it helps you automate, right? So it's a great starting point. And then when you're ready and want more productivity, more utilities, and to look at some of our other agents, those are optional and you can grow into those.
Mm-hmm. And does it require Kyverno itself running in your stack, or could you just run the agent without Kyverno?
You can run it without Kyverno. So it already has knowledge of policies, other things, and so you can scan your cluster without installing Kyverno. It will give you the best practices. It'll recommend the right policies for you. If you, of course, wanted to help install Kyverno and run that, it can, right? So, and it's not just Kyverno, it also kind of has knowledge about other components, around Kyverno, like if our remediation agent, for example, integrates with Argo CD and Flux, and can understand, like how those systems work. And that's how it finds the mapping from, Git repos to actual running applications, right? So, but yes, you can absolutely, you don't need to be running Kyverno to take advantage of this. In fact, we did that on purpose that you can download, get started, and then grow into other use cases.
That's really awesome. Really opens up a huge market for you. We're almost out of time. Last couple of questions that I want to ask. What does this mean for the platform engineer, the CISO, the people who are going to be using this tool? How does it change their workflow? What does it mean for their jobs? What have you seen in the first few days?
Yeah, we're seeing a lot of great feedback, right? And again, we've been working on some of these things with our customers for several months prior to even launch. We have great design partners who have been helping and guiding us. But the feedback really is, wow, this used to take me again weeks or months. Now it's like it's in minutes. I can kind of do it, and it's accurate, it's reliable, and actually of good quality, right? So that's kind of when I was earlier saying going from a skeptic to a true believer. To me, even for me personally, that's when I saw the outcome of like producing good code, as like what top level engineers could provide. That's the bar we wanted to set for our own products. And that's when I think even our customers become believers to say, yes, it can write better policies than I can. It understands how to optimize cell. It understands how to structure them. And that's like a wow moment, where you say, okay, I don't have to worry about this. I can trust it to do the thing right. I'm going to worry about there's several other things I have to worry about. So this is one thing off my plate, right?
Yeah, yeah. Wow, fascinating. The last question that I have for you, Jim, is as you look ahead to the next year or so, what excites you most in the space, policy management, or broadly Kubernetes? What are you keeping your eye on? What are you looking forward to? What are you keeping track of?
Yeah, so I mean, it's just amazing to see the growth in the Kubernetes and CNCF space, right? So our future is going to be, driven by software, and more we're seeing that AI is going to play a big role in the whole every aspect of software development, operations, management, delivery, right? Kubernetes, as you've probably seen all the numbers, has become the default way of running AI, and whether it's agents, LLMs, or even model training and tuning, it is the platform of choice. So it's fantastic to see that continued growth. But more and more, I feel like where we're seeing is that true productivity, where we can focus on the whole role of software is to deliver, like I mentioned, to deliver outcomes, right? And to make our lives better and easier, and to do things faster and better. So it's really exciting to see that, and how much again we can do, leveraging these. In terms of governance and policy, I always thought it was important, and of course, like we talked about with regulated industries, it has always been important. But now with AI coming, everybody needs this now, right? So whether you're ready or not, AI is coming, and what I mean is attackers are also using AI faster than like others are, right? So like I'm sure you saw some of the headlines with like there's this bot called HackerBot Claw, which took down some CNCF repos and caused a lot of, let's say, mischief in the space in a very short amount of time. That's going to happen to clusters. I mean, it's inevitable, right? So people who are not, set up for this, it's critical that you kind of put in, you do get the assessment, kind of figure out, what your posture looks like, and put in those guardrails and checks so that again, this and all of this is very accessible, to get of everybody to a good start and protect themselves, and also, of course, enhance productivity, optimize costs. So there's so many other values you can get from it.
Mhm. All right. Yeah, that's true. I think we might just see some really big breaches in the coming year that are going to be very AI driven. Yeah, should definitely prepare for that. But it was real pleasure chatting with you, Jim, and thanks so much for just sharing from your decades of experience, your insight. I think it really helped to just go, beneath the layers of the surface of AI and talk about the principles and just the ideas that drive all of this stuff. And yeah, I found a lot of things that you said quite fascinating about outcomes, about policies as productivity, so many things that you mentioned, returning to domain expertise, just so much to think about from all that you shared. Thanks so much for joining us, and we hope you'll come back again after a year or so once you've built something more or seen the AI assistant more in action to share how that's been after a year. We'd love to have you back.
Thank you for having me. My pleasure.
All right. And thanks to all of our listeners and viewers for tuning in. We hope you found this conversation as interesting as I did having it with Jim. Go and check out what they're up to at nirmata.com. And I think it's .com, or is it? Yeah, it's .com. It's nirmata.com. Go and check out what they're up to and try out the new AI assistant that they've just released. With that, we'll see you on the next episode. Thank you. Bye-bye.